How y'all doing today? Today it's kind of a difficult topic, but I think it's one that we should definitely get into. It's politics and how to talk about them without going crazy. You might add, think about them too. A little bit about my context. My family was composed of business people, educated folks, military folks. Also, as you all know, I pursued a doctorate later in life. Got a PhD in comparative politics, and I now teach in academia. A little bit of, shall I say, depth and breadth, maybe. Yeah, certainly people wouldn't have said that about me in the past. Now, I'm working on kind of the public aspects of being an intellectual, which has been an interesting journey so far. Context on that. Family context matters in my case. I've got a real cornucopia of folks in my background. Just as one example, on my dad's side of the family, we've got folks who opposed secession from the United States and then paradoxically fought for the Confederacy. And also, I am related to the radical abolitionist John Brown on my dad's side. So that must have been a really exciting Thanksgiving for those folks back then. On my mom's side, you have bootleggers and folks who immigrated from Germany under kind of mysterious circumstances in the late 1800s. Not really sure, nobody really knows. On my mom's dad's side, you've got folks who were medical professionals and some business folks, and then you've got bootleggers on my grandma's side. Interesting folks. I met one of them when I was in my early teenage years, and he took offense to something that a neighbor had said, and so he stole his car and drove it into a lake. He was in his 90s, and so he just played it all off like he was confused and thought it was his car, so nothing happened with that, legally speaking. I've got Democrats, Republicans in the background, but when I was growing up, my grandfather was a Republican. He was a three-star general. He had served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam. He had worked under George Bush Sr., knew him relatively well. He knew Ronald Reagan well. He'd been a lifelong Republican of the kind of old school sort. My dad also was a Republican, and my mom was a Republican, and my grandma was a Republican, of that kind of like liberal economic viewpoints, national defense sorts. No moral bent to that side of their politics for sure. Moral people in other ways, but definitely not religious or evangelical or anything like that. My grandfather was an atheist till the day he died, and could really lay it on you if you wanted to hear about why. That kind of context informs me. Born on the East Coast, but mostly raised in the Midwest, and so that informs my context too. And I think to get to kind of back to what we're talking about, you have to consider that in all likelihood, that context informs your baseline political sentiments and values. It can define what you find proper politically or what you find offensive politically. And therefore, being aware of that context can really help you to navigate some of these challenging times. We're going into yet another extremely challenging political time here in the United States for a whole variety of reasons. And it's been quite tumultuous for, the last 8 years, frankly. What can we do as individuals to navigate that those difficulties that are coming up for us? First off, I'm reminded of the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt: "Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. I think that is a worthy place to consider. Now, do I talk about people sometimes? Yes, I do. Do I examine events? I do a lot, actually. And I think to some extent, we all do. Many apologies to Eleanor Roosevelt, a little bit off base on there. I think that events can form patterns. The human brain being a device which can really do a great job at assessing patterns, we need to kind of have that context. Context matters to me. I mean, history matters. Discussing events is important. Discussing people, I think, is often less so, but not always. There are some incredibly important and nefarious historical figures and that have shaped a lot of events. And I think that from an intellectual standpoint, thinking about people and studying them is important. That said, gossiping about people or keeping up with the day-to-day activities of any one politician, to me, it makes me very anxious. Keeping my eye on weighty events that are happening in the country or around the world, I think is something that I can do generally without getting too wrapped up in it. Hopefully, I spend more of my time thinking about the ideas and the dynamics and the processes behind all of these things. But I'm a human being, not perfect. How do we get to that place where we can kind of more or less think about political events and world history and world events in a more objective way? Thinking about, you hear people say, I'm going to research that. And it's almost become kind of a pejorative term, like, I'm going to get on Reddit and get to the bottom of this or something. Not going to be the best channel for that in many cases. For instance, there are subjects which there are a lot of people who have a lot of very strong opinions about them, but it's hard to tell like what they're grounded in. So, for instance, what's socialism? You can hear socialists, oh, that's a socialist policy, like that's going to ruin everything. How can we understand what that is? Even in some circles, democracy is considered, anathema, an insulting term. So thinking about what are those things, how do they work, how do we see them in the world, and then being able to say, well, hey, it's this sort of economic system, it has these social implications. They don't always work like the ideas or the theories or the dynamics would suggest, because there's human beings out there. I think that Winston Churchill's comment about democracy is pretty illustrative. Democracy is the worst system in the world except for everything else because there's people in it. If there were robots, everything would be great. But thankfully, as of now anyway, people are not robots, and so they think things and do things for all kinds of fascinating and consternating reasons that we can't hope to predict on that kind of level. You have systems, you have these things, and understanding like the fundamentals of how they work, and then spinning that out to be like, well, this is how they would hope that this would work, but it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always play out like they'd want. The context also matters. Socialism in Canada is very different from what socialism is like in, say, Indonesia or Malaysia or China or Nepal. Those things also add their own context and flavor to what is happening in those places. With that fundamental kind of like stepping back and going like, there is no perfect system. There is no place in which this particular thing, socialism being the example we're using right now, is practiced to perfection to exactly what the proponents would establish and set it up and run it and expect to happen. It never happens exactly how folks would want. Democracy, exact same way. Authoritarian regimes, exact same way. Theocracies, same way. Monarchies, same way. They don't always get what they want. They don't always work the way in practice that their proponents would idealize them as. So having that understanding, stepping back and being like, are there objective as possible sources that I can take a look at when things are going on. Remember, social media and media writ large is mostly about people, and it's mostly about events. We will watch a news story and somebody got arrested, somebody's in court, this thing happened. And those kinds of contexts can be important, but they're not telling you the backstory of it. And I'm not talking about the prognostication, like, well, XYZ person says that this means that, and 5 years from now this is going to happen. Maybe so, but how do we know that? And is that valuable for me to spend my time engaging with that kind of stuff? I tend to think not. So stepping back from that kind of prescriptive, predictive sorts of things based on somebody's opinions from a talking head who's paid to be there, I'm not so much into that. What kind of sources can I consult that allow me to engage with these things at some greater depth, so that I can have some kind of basis with which to talk about them intelligently and with a minimum of emotion? Just a few things that I think of right away. If you're into like reading magazines and things like that, The Economist is a great source. On YouTube, there's a podcast by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart called The Rest is Politics, which I find particularly useful. They often talk about European politics because they're both from the United Kingdom, but they also comment on U.S. politics. They bring guests in, people who've been there in those rooms and done the things, politically speaking, been in cabinets, so forth and so on. And that is valuable in that each episode is about an hour, and they really dive into things and they touch on a variety of perspectives. And it's important to note that they are both from opposing political poles, so to speak. One of them was a long-term member of the Conservative Party, and the other was a long-term member of the Labour Party. So they have different perspectives, but they discuss them as rational adults. I haven't ever really seen them get mad at each other, that I can tell anyway. Other sources which are interesting to me, Ward Carroll's channel, and I'll link all these down below in the first comment, is valuable in that from a military perspective, you learn about how military folks react to, see, and act on information in a variety of contexts. Another kind of print media piece that I tend to enjoy is The Atlantic. You see different perspectives, some more quote-unquote liberal, some more conservative, some really policy-oriented folks. And The Economist is that way too, policy-oriented things mostly, with some op-ed pieces which are formally identified as such. Another great source is DW, the German news service. They have an English language YouTube channel, which is great because I can watch coverage of what's happening in the United States on this German channel because they have a remove from that. They're not embedded in it. They have no interest in generating controversy or driving up their ratings over the kinds of things that we tend to see on all of the major news networks in the United States. They don't have any interest in that, so they report on this is what is actually happening. Great stuff. BBC is another source like that. And by looking at some of these sources, as often as you can, I realize it's my job to do this. And it's really something that's always been a passion of mine, is to keep up with these things and know what's happening. I think it's also important as a voter to be aware of the dynamics of these issues, which are often far more complex than a 2-minute news story can convey. These kind of sources require more effort, take a little more time to engage with, but give you that context and often provide a level of analysis which goes far beyond what you would typically see or read, especially if it's a meme. To that point, look to those sources. Things that are designed to immediately provoke an emotional reaction in you, especially those that have some viewpoint that your morals and values and context really resonate with, you need to watch out and be very careful of that. Because oftentimes those are misinformation, disinformation, or pure propaganda. Whenever something comes out where it's like shocking, angering, saddening, and has like kind of a call to action element to it, wow, watch out. There are sophisticated people out there who are creating content on a variety of levels and platforms, but especially on social media, that is designed to do exactly that. Their purposes may not even be, and often aren't, about advocating for whatever group is involved in what you've just read. It's division. That's their goal, is to divide people from one another for their own purposes. It could be as simple as hoping that you click on something and getting some of your personal information so they can feed you more stuff like that, which happens anyway, right? Because the algorithms that are out there. Other things that they can do with that is, phishing attempts, all kinds of stuff like that. And this is happening all the time. And I really shouldn't even have to say it. You know this is happening. And so be wary of that kind of content. Now, if you see something and you're like, I am shocked, I am angry, then go to some of these other sources and see if it's realistic. I would also be very wary in this particular time of the text that we get. If you are politically active in any way, you're on lists. You will get text messages, you'll get emails. And many of these are designed, I subscribe to a lot of things and I see a lot of stuff. And I get these texts and I get emails. And they are designed to emotionally put you on the spot and be like, hey, blah, 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 we need money, which is the common theme right now. And these come from all different political perspectives. I get these. But I don't know where that's coming from. I have no idea. If I just react, and it's very easy to pay something on your phone, isn't it? If I just react and do that, I might be giving money to something that I have no idea what that is. So be careful. Be careful. Don't click on things. And I've been just ditching everything like that except the ones that I absolutely know are the real thing. So be careful of that. Be careful of sharing that kind of stuff. Because again, that's kind of what they want. Whether they're pure as the driven snow and they really have a moral reason for sharing these kinds of things, or perhaps they're a troll farm in the suburbs of Moscow, take a step back and think, should I share this? Is this grounded in reality? You can't trust the algorithm to feed you the truth, because it's gonna feed you what you like, what it senses that you like to see. And if you watch a lot of that stuff, it's gonna feed you more of it. To that point, be careful. And this kind of comes back to other things that happen on the internet. People will post things and you'll see these vicious fights emerge. I shouldn't really say they're fights, but they're stupid arguments on Facebook or other kinds of social media, where it immediately turns into some personal battle about this person, and then people are getting blocked and reported and all this craziness. And does that affect anything other than the emotional character of the relationships that you have? No. Does it affect the actual people who are involved in whatever issue that particular meme or story really affects? No, it doesn't. It affects you and your personal relationships. And really, for me, it affects my heart rate, my blood pressure, all kinds of things like that. And it's not good. So if somebody says something that you don't agree with, you are not obligated to engage. This goes for what happens in person too. I tend to be a person that people come to and be like, hey, what do you think about that? There are times where it's like, I have to make a judgment call. Do I really want to talk to this person about this subject or not? Sometimes I will, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just better to be like, really, I didn't know anything about that. I'll have to look into it, which that happens too. If somebody asks for my perspective, I might share that with them, but sometimes I might not. Like, hey, that's kind of tough to get into right now. There's a lot there, and unless you want to be here for a half an hour hearing me yap on about it, maybe we just step away from that one, which that also seems to work too. Social media is really not the place for that. I think in-person conversations are the place for that. Social media, I'm sure you'll all be shocked. I don't think it's a place where you can have a respectful exchange of ideas. It's not going to happen. Personally thinking, hey, this isn't the hill that I want to die on, or the gorilla that I want to get into the cage with, or whatever your metaphor might be. These kinds of issues, maybe take a step back from, maybe just talk to people that you trust, that you're friends with for a long time, that you can have a civil conversation with, especially coming up with this year. It's going to be tough. I don't have to tell you that. If it's too much, turn it off. I can remember several times over the last several years where it's been like, man, I am really anxious about this stuff. I'm going to not watch the news. I'm going to delete the news apps on my phone. I'm going to mute the people on social media who are constantly posting incendiary things. And you know what? It totally works. I can go and just look at art. I can re-engage with a hobby that I'm not working as much on. I can go play my guitar. I can walk my dog. I can do anything. Stepping away from it is completely okay. It's not going to matter because, hey, we're going to vote a couple times and maybe we donate money to places. That's what we can do. Take care of yourself in these times because it's difficult. And as we all know, people have had their relationships with many family members, close friends, really disrupted over the last several years. And remember back to what I was saying, those incendiary, divisive folks out there, that's their goal, is to divide and conquer. These people could be internal to the United States, external to the United States, or interested in their own profits. So anyway, take care of yourself. Do good things for yourself. Step away from these things if it's bugging you too much. But if you are interested, dig into the context a bit. Read up, learn something about it. I mean, this is something that doesn't take a whole lot of effort to find some relatively objective. And I say relatively because there's humans involved. It's never going to be completely objective. And remember, ideas and policies and events, not so much people. Thanks for spending time with me today. I hope you get something out of this. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.